This was supposed to be about post-spawn.
Whatever you want to do.
Yeah, and that's what I was going to talk about, which there is a little bit of that going on. We've had a lot of cold weather. I just come from a solo pro at Palmy Sunday. I got to practice Wednesday and Thursday. Both mornings going through Bolivar, the air temperature was 39 degrees Wednesday and Thursday. I put in at Bolivar Landing, water temperature was 59. There's a lot of healthy looking fish. I mean, the water was dirty there, so I ran towards the main lake to the dam and found 63 degrees, 64 degree water that same morning. So, and it was clearer, so that water didn't change as much, and that's where I got a lot more bites. I fished an hour without a bite before I did that. And I think there's a big wave getting ready to spawn. I caught 20 keepers that day, and most of them males, but they were healthy. They weren't beat up like they've been garden beds. A lot of them were peeing as soon as you grab a hold of them. I had 2 over 3 pounds. They both looked like females that were full of eggs. And what fish I've seen weigh in that were 4 to 5 pounds, none of them had spawned yet.
Wow.
So this week is the first week where we've had every morning, the lows are going to be in the 60s, highs 70s, some 80s by the end of the week. So I think, and a full moon's probably a week and a half away. So I think the big push everywhere is just getting ready to happen. Now that being said, you know, I fished BFL at Table Rock 3 weeks ago and caught all my fish bed fishing. Just had 10 pounds and got to check both days. Well, I had 13 pounds one day and 12 pounds one day, and got to check both days. So wasn't a lot of big fish moved up, but the guys that won it did catch big fish, bed fishing. They just marked a lot of them in practice and knew where they were. And I didn't get to practice much and didn't think that would be the deal yet, but it was. And I just didn't run across any big ones. Most of my fish came in that deal, and even when I can't see them on beds, I throw a little Ned head a lot and a little worm. 5-fish Ned head and a little Strike King worm. I caught probably half my fish on that, another half on a 5-fish jig. For some reason, I caught a lot, which was good about Table Rock. We've got all 3 species were spawning, and I could throw the worm on smallmouth, spotted bass, and they were eating it like first or second flip on a bed. They were eating it so fast you had to, or sometimes you thought you were spooking the fish and didn't know that they'd already took it off the bed. You really had to watch your line. That's going to be, and like, I don't want to get ahead of talking about the Stockton Championship, but I've caught bedding fish at Table Rock in June before, so I know there still could be some at Stockton in June. Could be a very good possibility. The other thing is I fished Dardanelle 2 weeks ago. Another thing that's going to happen real quick, especially with this warm week, is shad spawn. That was going on in practice at Dardanelle, and we had the same problem there. We had 2 nights where it almost frosted back to back, and they just quit. Like they were in shallow grass. And I mean, there was still some of it going on, but in practice it was everywhere. And they were easy to catch. Just a white jig, swimming a white jig with a Strike King trailer. I mean, it was just keeping it simple and covering water. A lot of stuff that they call water willow, which, like Table Rock, Stockton, Palmy, they're all going to be high. I don't. Where you guys live in Willard? How much rain did you get yesterday?
Not as much as it is Stockton.
Yeah, I mean, it was weird. Like I live just north of Springfield. We got maybe an inch, and I talked to a friend in Walnut Grove that got 4 inches in an hour and a half, and all that runs right to Stockton. It came up, what, 2 foot today, I think.
Seen some pictures on Facebook earlier that look like
the rivers run. I mean, it's just, yeah. Palmy come up 2 foot today. That puts a lot of fresh grass in the water, and that's going to be really key on those two lakes. Like Stockton or Table Rock didn't come up hardly at all, so they must not have got a rain down there. I mean, it's still 2 foot high, but it's been that, so there's not going to be that fresh green grass in the water. This time of year, I throw a topwater a lot, usually a Xeraspook, Strike King Sexy Dog. Same types of area. I want something just like my first bite at Palmy this weekend, Sunday. I practiced, the bushes had about 2 foot of water on them. When I come back to fish the tournament, I worked a deal in Columbia, Special Olympics event, Friday and Saturday. And while I was gone those 2 days, they dropped about 1 foot out of the lake. Pulled up to my first couple bushes on this point that I wanted to fish, and they were almost out of the water. I just happened to notice a log about 2 foot off. It was under the water, but I could see the dark spot. First pitch that morning, and bait didn't move. Lifted up on it. It felt solid, but I thought I'm on the log. Let a little slack in it, and it just went slack. The bait didn't fall or nothing. It raised back up and it's still solid. Set the hook and it was over a 3-pounder. And that makes me think that fish was on a bed and just didn't want to move. And it was a male, I believe, because it was peeing all over the place. And I wore that log out the rest of the day, thinking that if there's a female that goes with that, it's going to be a really good one. I think I hit that log 3 more times, about every 2 hours. The rest of the day, it was a 9-hour tournament. Never got another bite there, but a lot of the fish, like I said, I caught 20 keepers that day, and a lot of the fish were that way. You pitch in a bush, and they didn't want to move out of it. The day before, it was rainy. Weather is a big deal. Like, you know, there's 18-pound bags, 16-pound bags, 17-pound bags the day before in a Joe Bass, and the Solo Pro Sunday, it was hard to get a bite. It rained all day Saturday. Sunday we had almost total sunshine from start to finish, and those fish fed up good, and what ones were on beds didn't want to move. They were there by cover. There was not much wind until really late in the day. So the fish are staying close to cover. That's one reason why I throw something like this, a Sexy Dog, a Xeraspook, Pop-R, something that I don't work very fast. I keep it in an area, like if this is a stump here, you know, I want it to stay real close to that stump for quite a while. But sometimes them fish will just look at it until they make it. Man, there's times you have to make 4 or 5 casts at the same thing. Going back to that Dardanelle tournament, the first morning of it, I was still fishing the shad spawn because it was real good in practice, like I was talking about. I was swimming that jig through it and pitching a black and blue jig through it. That's what I caught all my fish on in practice. And it didn't matter where I went, I was catching a lot of 2 to 2.5 pounders. The lake was fishing small, the main river was rolling mud because of all the rain. I didn't get a bite for 2 hours the first morning, and my backup plan was fishing a few docks. I pitched by the side of this dock with my black and blue jig that I've been catching on fish on, pitched by the other side of it, went back around it because that dock had got me a keeper in practice and got me a bite that I shook off the second day in practice. And fished it real thorough. My partner went through it behind me with a little brush hog, green pumpkin brush hog, and catches a 2-pounder. And I thought, well, maybe I'm using the wrong bait. He caught that fish after I'd fished the heck out of it, and he was like his second pitch to it on the back side of it. But he never got another bite the rest of the day, and I caught 4 fish that weighed almost 10 pounds. And that one fish, well, you know, it's a little bit of bad luck. If I'd have had that, I'd have got a check in the tournament. The second day, talking about how they didn't want to move very far from some stumps, I was fishing some strip pits and had a couple of stumps between those strip pits. Went by them. They were probably 5 foot apart in about 3 foot of water. Not very deep at all. You could see a foot down. I caught 2 keepers and a short fish off of them. Pitched by them another 10 times, nothing. going on by it. My partner pitches by it 10 times. And I'm fishing grass again already. He didn't get a bite. We get 20 feet past it. He picks up a medium diving crankbait that goes about 10 foot deep. Throws it back by those stumps. Has his rod up like this because it's digging in the bottom corner. And catches a 610 off those same 2 stumps that we just made 20 pitches by. And you know, that fish was probably there the whole time. Just didn't want to move, and he threw something by there that was probably right on top of it, and it turned around and ate it. You know, that was a top 10 fish if I get it. That's where luck plays a little bit in this. And we both fished it thorough, but he picked the right angle and the right bait, and never got another bite on a crankbait that day. And he threw it a lot after that, after he caught that 610. Threw it a lot. This is a jig I was throwing there, 9/16. I was throwing black and blue and brown, mixing up, and the white in the cover jig. And this is a jig I was using a lot at Table Rock when they were on beds. It seemed like the largemouth liked the jig, smallmouth Kentuckies like the worm. Anytime they're on beds, I usually give them a lot of options. That's a time when I have a lot of rods out, and I don't really like that, but I was catching them on a tube, a worm, a little crawl, a little striking rage crawl, and once they got, you could tell real quick, like if they were getting used to a bait and they wouldn't react to it, I would grab another one. Sometimes it could be the same color. I did catch a few using like a white tube where I could see it. A lot of times I use that white tube just to aggravate them because I can see them and bump into them with that white tube. I know I'm like turning them around. They got to be hooked in the mouth, so you got to be careful at that. But I always Texas rig it where the hook is not exposed, so I don't really have a problem with when I bump into them with a bait of snagging that fish. They've got to eat it, and that's the problem with the spawn too. Is sometimes they'll pick that bait up and move it just a little bit off that bed or spit it out of that without eating the whole bait. And I would rather see them do that a few times than set the hook and let them feel it rip out of their mouth a little bit. So it doesn't bother me to watch them like totally eat a bait because they don't have it very long. And once they do that a few times, they'll do it longer and longer each time and give you more of an opportunity to hook them right. The worst thing you can do is get them halfway to the boat and them come off. And sometimes they'll clamp down on it so hard when they don't eat it right, you can do that without them having the hook in them at all. And I don't worry about line so much in that situation either. Table Rock was clear, I could see 8 foot deep, and I caught most of my fish using 20-pound line. It's because a lot of the beds were by lay down sticks. They try to get where they think they're hid, and something's usually in your way. And most of the time I want to go vertical over whatever they're trying to hide behind and go straight down on top of that bed where I'm not moving it out of that bed very much. It's staying in there the whole time if I can. I had fish, like I said, eat it so fast sometimes that they'd swim off and still have the bait in their mouth way over here, but that was mostly smallmouth and spotted bass. They were a lot easier to catch. This is our Magnum finesse head in the 5 fish, and that's what I was using on the Ocho. The bigger worm, the bigger hook. Anytime I was using a smaller worm, and a lot of times on the little Ned head, I'll just cut these in half. I hardly ever buy the little ones because these are cheaper if you cut them in half. And a lot of times I'll save these. I'll use them on this, and when they get tore up here, I'll just throw them throw them in a box, and then cut them in half after I use them a little bit, and use the middle end. That way I'm using them twice. If you cut them, like once it gets tore up on this end, cut them straight in half and worm them on the finesse head. And really, when they get tore up on the other end, it adds a little bit of color to that's different on the tail end of it. That looks pretty neat. Just like when you rub a worm to get the salt to the top and it changes the color of it after you get a few bites on them. At Palmy, I caught fish on, like I said, the jig, tube. I caught some late in the day on a buzzbait. But that was the same type of deal. I think anytime I caught a fish on a buzzbait, it was multiple casts to a log. That's going to be big for a month now, is fry garters, even after the spawn. Making multiple casts to your target. That's so important. I got at Palmy, from what I heard from the day before, 16, 17, 18 pounds is what I thought would win it. I kind of gambled after I had 11 pounds, thinking I needed 2 or 3 more good bites. I had 2 over 3 and three just that were under 2 pounds probably. And I started working my way up the river. Water was getting a little cooler, but I thought that was dirtier. It was dirtier. I thought that was a way to get a big bite. And I didn't help myself much at all the last 3 hours, probably an ounce or 2. And I think if I would have stayed on that main lake where the water was warmer and I knew the fish were already on beds, but that's the thing. I'm thinking I need 2 or 3 big bites, and when I get in, I think I finished 14th, but I was only 3.5 pounds out of first. Where if I would have upgraded a couple of them that didn't weigh 2 pounds, that makes up a lot of ground. Has anybody been fishing here lately? What lakes are you going to next? Is anybody going? You guys are going to Stockton next.
We just came from Palmy, me and him did.
Did you?
I think we were up there the 10th.
The 10th?
Yeah.
These lakes have been coming and going. Like, I was fishing one of those strip pits in the Toyota series at Dardanelle, and I fished 2 different areas both days because I was catching the same size fish no matter where I went, 2 to 2.5 pounders. And one of the strip pits I was in practice was 67, 68 degrees. And I didn't go in there the last day of practice, and I didn't go in there the first day of the tournament. And I was halfway through it the second day, and I was flipping a tube and flipping a jig, and I ran into James Watson, and he was just throwing a frog right up on the bank and working it back. And this was probably an hour and a half after I got there, and I just caught one little one right as I was getting to him. It was a keeper, but it was little. And he said he hadn't had a bite yet, but he caught a few out of there the day before, late. And I said, well, I didn't even fish in here yesterday, but I was in here in practice, and it was 67, 68 degrees, and now it's showing 62 and 63. And he goes, that's probably why I ain't getting bit on a frog. And that's been happening everywhere. The cold rains. Now, last night's was a little warmer, finally, but our rains have been cold, so it's been making the rivers colder than the main lake. Normally this time of year it's just the opposite. That dirty water and sunshine, which we've not had much of, warms the dirty water up. And I ended looking back at Palmy, I did things a little backwards because that water was cold and dirty, and it just didn't work. After this week of warm rain and 60-degree mornings and 70, 80-degree days, that's probably going to turn around, and the rivers are going to get really good. Because I think normally they spawn there first because of the dirty and warmer water, but it's just been the opposite this year. Well, that's fishing. every year it seems like we have fronts and stuff. That anybody have any questions? Like, any of you guys going fishing in the near future? What lake do you fish the most?
We fish Table Rock.
Table Rock.
We're fishing Stockton.
I'm going to Table Rock the next 2 days. Because there's an Ozark Mountain Team Trail there Saturday. Now I've been hearing, now see that's a lake where they had a pretty good spawn when I was talking about that BFL 3 weeks ago. May have been even 4 weeks ago. So they're starting to get, it's a little different than these lakes like Palmy and Stockton. I'd say probably half their fish spawned in, or close to it. And I think there's going to be another big wave there too. But that's making a really good topwater bite, those ones that spawned 3 or 4 weeks ago right now. Really good topwater bite. And that's a lake where, because there's so many species, you can catch them on topwater right on the bank. You can catch Kentuckies out schooling with like a redfin, the bank fish, buzzbait. Once that spawn, like when you're fishing for fish that have already spawned, and that's my favorite time of year, when they're done with that and they want to eat again. That's when the buzzbait, you can cover a lot of water and catch a lot of fish. And hopefully that's going to work Saturday. Now that's another thing, the weather. It's supposed to rain tomorrow, and I think a 50% chance Thursday. So they're going to eat up in the next few days, and then Saturday it's going to be, I think, 82 degrees and sunny. So they don't have to eat every day like we do. So that's what makes good days and bad days. There's always when it's post spawn like that, like a worm, a jig. Whenever it gets hot after cloudy, rainy days, like Table Rock, I concentrate on docks a lot, depending on whether you have wind or not. There's so many variables in this. Even on a sunny day, if you have wind, the water temperature is not high yet by any means. Even, I'm here in Table Rock, 65, 68 degrees. That's water that they like to chase in and get after it. So if you got a little breeze, I'm throwing crankbait, spinnerbait, buzzbait, covering a lot of water. And I like to fish for the ones that want to eat. Now, I'm saying that after I go through an area, like if I find a 50-yard stretch that I caught a lot of fish on a spinnerbait, buzzbait, I go through a stretch that I don't catch so much, I'll probably turn around and go back through that area where there was a few fish on a jig, a worm, something on the bottom, and see if almost everywhere I catch a few fish, I'm throwing some other type of bait. If I go through an area and catch a few on a jig or a worm, I'll throw a crankbait through there, depending on what level of the water column they're in. Like if I'm fishing 5 foot of water and I caught one on a spinnerbait 2 foot down, when I come back through there, I may throw a swim bait through that area if it's suspended. I'm gonna give them a chance to come and get that first before I throw something on the bottom. Same way with a bush. If I'm fishing a bush, a stump, I'm gonna throw to the outside edge of that first, or the outside corner. I always think there's 2 fish, especially this time of year, everywhere I pitch a bait. I think there's at least 2 fish. So I don't wanna throw a bait right in the middle of that first and disturb it and drag it out if they will come out and eat one off a corner or an edge. I attack every dock, every stump, everything that way. You see a lot of guys on TV pitching way underneath a dock on their first cast. Well, if there's one right here and you drag a 3-pounder from back here by all that stuff, there's a good chance you're going to pull all them out a little bit to see what's going on and follow it to the boat. If you catch these ones on the outside first, sometimes those ones in the back don't even know what happened. Like I said earlier, I use the biggest line I can get away with for the situation. Docks, I'm hardly ever go under 20-pound test line unless I'm fishing deep on a dock and I know there's nothing, absolutely nothing in the way. If it's an open boat slip, I may go down to 12. That's about as low as I'm going to go. Top water baits, I use mostly. I used to use a lot of braid. I'm kind of getting away from that and using mostly mono again. Have a lot less problems, especially with walking baits. When you get slack in the line, the braid gets tangled up in the hooks. Anything you can do to be more efficient on the water. Think of your line, every hook, every rod, every reel as a tool to be the most efficient you can on the water. Just like making sure your spool is full of line at the start of a day. All your gear ratios are based upon that spool being completely full. That's very important if you're doing something with a high-speed reel and you need it to be high speed at the time. But I think the best is yet to come on all our lakes. I think with this, it's weird to say that when it's already the middle of May, and normally a lot of our good fishing's in April around here, but because of the weather and rain, I think the best is, like, you guys are going to hit Stockton at an unbelievable time where it should be a lot of fun, a lot of limits waiting. Table Rock's getting ready. They're all going, unless something weird happens and we get 10 inches of rain and they all flood. That can make them all tough. They can get too high. Stockton's on the verge of that right now. Hopefully, I was looking at Truman. Truman's like a power pool, so I don't know why. Stockton kept theirs up, 3.5 foot this whole time when everybody else dropped it. Somebody should be asked about that because they had plenty of time to put that in Truman and absorb this that we got yesterday and not be so bad. But now it's gonna, when it gets, I struggle on that lake when it gets like 5-6 foot high. There's so much to fish, and part of my problem is I think I go too far up the river on that lake when it gets high. I fish stuff I grew up on instead of doing like I was talking about palmy, staying in the main lake, the clear. When it gets that flooded, there's that much cover, like from here to that wall is the bank. I think it helps you a lot if they can see the bait.
Go back and touch on top water a little bit. You said, when you're working by a stump or stuff like that, so you try and keep it in that area a little bit longer. So when you do that, are you just slowing your bait down a whole bunch? Are you still walking the dog, or are you stopping it and set there and then starting? Yeah,
I'm pausing it more than normal. Like was talking about, like Table Rock after the spawn. I don't hardly ever pause it when I'm walking a spook, but when I think a fish is on a bed is when I do. And smaller twitches. Like, I don't want that big side to side like I do when I'm covering a lot of water. You don't really need to make a lot of noise with it, but you want them to think it's alive. So you just gotta, just little twitches and try not to move it very far. Pop R is one of my favorite baits this time of year. So you can just do, like, you can make a lot of noise with it without moving it hardly at all. Just a little twitch and it spits some water, and that is what's getting ready to get really good, because that water temperature is getting in the 60s, and that's one of my favorite baits. It's just a regular pop R, something that looks like a shad. about always use a shad color this time of year. Unless the fish tell me they're not, like if I miss some fish, fished a solo at Stockton last year. The lake was flooded. I had a white frog on, missed 3 fish in a row, reeled it in, cut it off, put a black one on, and caught 4 in a row. But so if you're missing fish, a lot of times it's color or size. And I don't throw a lot of, I try to keep everything simple. I'm gonna throw a white or a black in about any top water. There's certain times, like real clear water, I may try to get a little bit more realistic with a shad pattern, but most of the time it's white or black. And most of the time when you have to get real realistic, it's in the fall. It's a lot clearer water, and they just chase it a lot more, and they hit it a lot harder in the fall. And they seem to, you have to be a little more realistic in the fall, I think, than you do in the spring. A lot of that, like I said, is clarity of water. But usually this time of year, you can't fish it too slow. Any other questions?
I guess that's why it's so tough. I'm in the same boat as these guys over here. I'm a boat captain for a Nixa high school team. And I think that's why it's so tough, is because we've been doing real well. In fact, we went out Sunday down in Table Rock, down around the dam area, and went off gravel rock points, and just did really well catching the smallmouth and stuff. But we started off, pulling the Ned rig pretty fast, and then we slowed it way down, and that's when we just started getting them left and
right. Yeah.
It's really hard though,
Yeah.
to figure out what they want,
Yeah.
and that's what my problem is.
Yeah.
Is I'm trying to, to figure out, but it changes. I mean, I've always said Table Rock changes daily, and it does.
Yeah. Oh, it does.
I mean, you could go down there. We fished that last junior high tournament and stuff, or high school tournament down in Table Rock, and what was it? The PTA was pretty nice, and then Sunday was terrible.
Yeah.
And it just totally switched everything.
Right.
It's like I knew where those fish were, and we couldn't get them to hit for nothing on Sunday.
Yeah. I've been doing this over 30 years, and I caught myself at Palmy flipping the bushes too fast.
Yeah.
I was in practice mode. In practice, I don't care if I catch every fish. All I want is a bite every once in a while to see if they're in that area, and I want to go to another area. And the last few hours at Palmy, I was burning down the bank, just not giving them much time in a bush. And I caught myself and slowed back down and started catching keepers again. But there was times, like I tried to go to vertical in those bushes too. Like I said, I start on the outside edge, but I want to catch a limb, one of the smallest limbs on the outside that I can manipulate if I do get a bite. I don't want it to be over a thick limb, if all possible. I want one that, when I set the hook, it's going to give real easy. And there was times I was having to go over a limb and just shake it in spots or raise it up and down 3 or 4 times before it would just go solid.
Wow.
And I got to where I was going too fast at Palmy for part of the day.
Yeah.
And I had to slow back down. And there's times when, like the day before when it was raining all day, I probably could have got away with that, going a little faster when they were eating better. It's like you said, it's day to day, and you gotta be thinking all the time in this. So
It's like you and I, we don't get fish all the time.
No.
So we go down there,
Except for
these
the
guys, probably
Well,
more than me and you put together.
Yeah.
Guaranteed.
and that's what,
And it's hard.
yeah, that's what hurt me.
That's my challenge right now.
That's what took me a while. Like I went and worked that Special Olympics Friday and Saturday when everybody else was practicing, and they pulled that water out of them bushes some, and some of my best stuff was all the way out of the water, but there was other places that was a little flatter that was still good. Yeah. So I had to re-find spots again, just from missing 2 days on the water because they dropped it. They dropped it because I talked to a park ranger at weigh-in because they were doing swiftwater rescue stuff on the other side of the dam, doing training. So they needed swift water,
Wow.
yeah, Thursday and Friday for practicing for that.
Yeah.
And then they started bringing it right back up.
Hey, I don't know, up there at Palmy by the dam, that algae bloom,
That's going on right now, yeah.
do you think that affects the fish when they're spawning?
Not really. I don't think it does that once they've started. I think they think that's cover. They're really pretty dumb most of the time. Like some of the fish I caught, like that very first one, was 2 foot from where I shook one off in practice Thursday. And several of the fish I caught were on the same log. Like I would run the log just inside a point, and I'm gonna probably get a bite here. And sure enough, and I know some of them were the same fish because they'd have marks on there, like a black spot on their top of their head or something, and in the same areas.
Table Rock's got a lot of algae on the banks as well.
Yeah.
Most of their banks are a lot of algae. You know, it's up there in South Moscow. Throw it up there. That's why I try to stay 4 or 5 foot off the bank. There's so much that's
Yeah.
down there.
Yeah, see, I didn't see any of that until takeoff, because it was all right. Most of it was right there at the dam at Palmy. Like in the cove area, it was all around me. Where I was fishing, I didn't see any of that. The wind can dirty, like late in the day, when I just figured out I needed to be back in a little bit clear water, some of the stuff that I was fishing, the wind blew pretty good the last 2 hours, and it got so muddy that it was just like fishing up the river, and I needed to be on the other side of the lake. Had to make that adjustment late in the day and caught a few more keepers. None of them helped me, but I went from not getting bit to getting bit by just switching side of the lake, because this time of year they don't need wind, and they don't really want wind when they're spawning. If you can get out of it and catch fish, you're usually better off.